From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones, and this is the Thames. We are at Teddington Lock. I can see rowing boats, geese, trees full of sunshine, and a big brown river. I'm with a group of people about to go for a dip.
Nice and warm. It's a nice temperature, isn't it? Really good temperature. It's lovely. Perfect temperature.
Because would you believe this is shaping into a big election issue? Our dirty, sewage-filled rivers and what to do about them.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election.
It was top of Keir Starmer's list.
We will stop the chaos. Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers. People waiting on trolleys in A&E. Crime virtually unpunished.
And the Chancellor isn't happy either.
You know, I represent constituents who have been very badly served by Thames Water, and I'm very cross at them asking to be bailed out with big increases in their water bills when their owners have ramped up debt in the company that has put them in a very bad state.
And the Lib Dems are wading in.
What people on the doorstep are talking to me about every single day is the fact they can't get to see a GP, the fact that they're struggling to put food on the table every week, and the fact that our water companies are pumping filthy sewage into the rivers and seas.
The biggest company, Thames Water, are asking to raise bills by over 40, maybe even over 50%. But what about the floating voter?
If there was a guarantee that our bills are going up and there would be investment into the infrastructure, you'd probably have people on board. But I don't think your average man on the street really trusts big corporations.
The story today is Thames Water full of crap.
Over 10 is warm, over 10 is fine. But it goes down to 5 and 3.
I don't need a wetsuit or anything.
No. But
I'm a fragile soul. This group is called the Blue Tits, and some of them swim here most days. I join them on a Sunday morning. There's about 20 people crowding round the riverbank. There's a trolley, cakes today, but on evening swims, people bring bottles instead. What was your name, sorry?
Chris. I'm Chris, yeah.
When we were in the water, you looked cool as a cucumber.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you.
I don't know how you're doing. Maybe it was sort of shock or...
No, I think it's just that feeling of being in the water is just the most incredible, calming. Once you get past that shock of getting in and it's a little bit cold, it's just that feeling of everything just settles in the most wonderful way.
And there was a sweet spot where I couldn't feel my skin anymore and it was all lovely.
Kind of tingle.
And then it got cold again.
Okay.
So I was ready to get out after about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a poo?
No, I've seen floaty things that I'm not quite sure what they are, like dog bags and those kind of things.
Dog poo bags?
Yeah, but actually like this, it's clear. You can see kind of half a metre.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we're not cautious and we consider it and we think about it and we talk about it in our group and there are people that check. And it would be nicer if the river was cleaner.
You're a Thames Water customer. How do you feel about the prospect of maybe bills going up?
Absolutely horrified. You know,
but they say you want clean rivers and you want investment putting in. Well, we need to charge you for it.
All the years where our bills have been creeping up, we haven't seen the investment, and we've got a major problem where we are in Thames.This, where when there's rain, our storm drain in the road pops, and literally everybody's toilet comes out in the road, and it is the most disgusting thing. And you can see it.
Out on the street? Or everyone's sewage is bubbling up?
We call Thames Water, and they come and they kind of do a bit of a clean-up, but it all just runs straight into the river. Toilet paper, poo, everything that people chuck down their toilets, it just pops.
You can see what your neighbours are eating.
It's disgusting. Yeah, 100%. It's gross. And that's been ongoing. I've been in Thames.This for 12 years, and it hasn't really changed.
Can you give me all your names and who you are?
Yes, so my name is Marlena Lawrence and I am the leader and founder of the Teddington Blue Tits, a swim group that I founded in January 2021.
What do you like about swimming in the Thames?
The fact that you're so close to nature and it's free, it's a lovely resource to have. It's beautiful here. We don't have an awful sewage outflow too near us, so we know that really the river is a great quality where we swim.
Yes.
And it's just lovely.
So you have no worries about it being mucky water?
We always have worries. We are mindful. In the last 6 months, with all the news that's been happening and the sewage outflows, we are very mindful. We mostly swim head up. We don't swim after a very heavy rainfall. We know to look on a Thames Water sewage map when they open up the sewage, but we just hate it, really.
Thames Water says we're under a lot of financial pressure. We want to help sort the situation out, but we need to put bills up by around 40+% to help us do that.
Yes, well, nobody will agree with that. I think the government really need to step in and stop them doing that, and some other plan has to be made for them not to do that. We can't be held accountable for their mismanagement. That's just not fair, and it's not right.
My name's Dominic O'Connell. I'm the Times Radio business correspondent, and for a long time I was business editor of the Sunday Times and various other jobs before that.
Are you a wild swimmer?
Not in freshwater, really. I was at the Thames recently by Cliveden, the National Trust property.
Oh, yeah.
The Thames was very high and it was a very hot day. And I thought, gosh, it'd actually be quite nice to go in the water. And there were a few people in the water.
But you didn't do it.
The
thought passed your mind.
I looked and saw quite a lot of bubbles on the surface, which is normally the sign of things aren't going that well. So I was never going to go in. But I very much like swimming in the sea, and I will always check what the water quality rating is if I happen to go into the sea.
So bubbles is the answer, because some of the blue tit swimmers were saying when it looks a bit foamy is what they use.
Well, exactly that, foamy and bubbly. That's what I was looking for.
Gosh, noted. So Dom, before we launch straight into Thames Water and the problems that are there, just explain for us why this isn't any old water company.
Thames is the largest of the 10 water and sewerage companies that were created at privatisation, by far the largest, 16 million customers, not just London, but also a big stretch of the Thames Valley going right out to Gloucestershire. So it's by far the biggest, employs about 9,000 people and is the 800-pound gorilla of the water industry.
Yes, and there's a basic level of service we expect from water and sewage companies. Broadly, are Thames Water achieving that?
No. So if you look at the most recent rankings from Ofwat of how water companies do across the board, it rates 17 companies, because there are 7 which just do water only. And of those 17, Thames was third from the bottom on a whole range of measures. Thames loses a quarter of all the water it provides through leakage.
Loses it? So just somewhere in the pipe network it just vanishes?
Either it goes out through its pipes, through its customers' pipes, or another thing, through what it calls unmetered usage, because nearly 20% of Thames customers don't have meters. So 2.6 billion litres a day, of which 650 million odd is wasted.
Gosh, so there could be some customer somewhere keeping a dolphin, but they don't have a meter, and so
Exactly.
Thames don't know.
Exactly.
And how tricky are things for Thames Water as a business?
Well, Thames is at a crossroads. The reason it's at a crossroads is that its owners, which is a group of sovereign wealth funds and big pension funds, have said that they are going to walk away. This is not some kind of negotiating threat or a hope to get a better deal in terms of future bills and how much they can earn. They're just saying, no, we are going. They haven't had a dividend from the business for 7 years, so Thames hasn't paid a dividend to its shareholders since 2017. Their investment is worth about £5 billion, or that's how much they put into the company to buy into it. So they're prepared to say goodbye to £5 billion. And in fact, they've already written it off on their books.
That's how bleak they think the prospect is.
That's how bleak. And I've spoken to a few of them, and they say, in essence, they're being asked to put in £1, well, because there's a lot more than £1, and get back maybe 60p. They don't want to do that. So they've said, goodbye, sort it out without us.
And the reason they think the prospects for Thames Water are so bleak is because of this enormous debt that they have. Is that right?
It's in part the debt, but really it's the prospect of the extra debt they will have to take on, that Thames will have to take on, to pay for the spending that's expected over the next 5 years. So there's an awful lot that Thames is being asked to do in terms of improving their record on sewage outflows, clean water for drinking, leakage. All these things are being asked to be improved over the next 5 years. There's just not only new environmental regulation coming down the track, but also an awful lot of public and political pressure on these companies to do better. Yeah. And that leaves Thames in a difficult crossroads, because quite what happens next is not clear, really.
So in terms of the situation with Thames Water, then, it's got this enormous debt, which is, what's it, 15 billion?
Probably about 16 billion in total.
16 billion or so. As you said, its own shareholders are thinking, we don't want to get any more involved to help you get out of this. Prices going up is the option then, at least in part. What does Thames Water want to do on that front?
Well, prices will go up. There's no doubt about it. Thames has asked for, if you include inflation, a 56% increase in bills.
And is that in 1 year or over a period?
Sorry, I should say. It's over the whole 5-year period.
Got you.
So that's a big increase in bills. But that's probably going to happen, I think, regardless of who owns Thames Water in the future. It may not be 56%, but there will be a big increase in bills simply because regulators are asking Thames to spend money on new stuff. And the public expects new stuff from Thames.
So Thames is struggling to borrow. It can't get any more from its existing shareholders. So it's the customers who are going to be shaken down.
They will have to pay regardless. And even if Thames had not gone into financial trouble, there would have been an increase in bills. The only place the money comes from in the water industry is from customers' bills. So I think what happens next is unclear, because who is going to own Thames Water? If the existing shareholders have walked away, it's complicated by the fact that Thames is owned through a company called Kemble Water. It's run out of money, so maybe the lenders to Kemble could take that, and with it Thames Water. Thames Water itself is a separate company which has a special status under the law. Even though it is owned by Kemble, it's regulated by Ofwat. It could go to Ofwat and say, listen, we don't have any money, so we want to reduce the amount of spending we do to improve water quality, sewage outflows, this kind of thing. And they'd have to get into a fight with Ofwat.
The regulator was going to publish an interim decision on the 12th of June about all of this, but, like my holiday, has been pushed back because of the election. Dom, you're taking us through the situation with Thames Water and the difficult situation they find themselves in. They're sitting on this monumental pile of debt that they currently don't have lots of means of servicing. It wasn't always that way. Take us back to, well, pre-privatisation, the water utilities were what?
They were area water authorities, largely of the same footprint as the current Big Ten. And if you go back to the end of the 1990s, and I reported on this because I was working on a construction trade magazine, the big fear then was that the European Wastewater Directive was coming down the track. Everyone thinks about privatisation then as being an ideological thing, and in a sense it was, because we'd had the big Thatcher privatisations, BT, BP, British Airways. But the motivation for water was money, because as Byatt told me at the time, the wastewater directive was coming down the track, and in fact the politicians at the time were very open about this. There was an awful lot of spending that was going to need to be done by water companies. How were you going to finance it? Did you do it all out of public money, and that was a very big number, or did you try and get private sector money involved? And that certainly fitted with the Conservatives' view of things, and it fitted with the what the wallet needed at the time. So
that would be costly, because they all of a sudden have to be meeting all these standards.
All these European standards.
Yes.
Which had just not been anywhere near the UK before. So how do you pay for that? Well, you could privatise it. And that way the spending would not be on the government's balance sheet. It would be on a private balance sheet. And most people think that the people who bought these private companies got a pretty good deal. The government took on all their debt, so they were privatised pretty much debt-free, and they had this monopoly on water provision. But with this sort of iceberg coming down the track, iceberg might not be the right berg, but coming down the track
as you get.
Of lots of spending that had to be done to meet all these new regulations that were coming.
Yes. And then thinking about the current debt issues that Thames Water has at the moment, interestingly, it seems that it was under one of its later owners, so someone who bought Thames Water, as it was then in 2006, Macquarie, where things started to rack up a bit.
That's right. I think that the privatised water industry went along okay for the first sort of 10 years or so. Then there was a failure, sort of a joint failure of regulation, and then a failure of governance, really. The people that own these water companies realised that they were a bit smarter than the regulator. The regulator would estimate every 5 years how much it would cost them to fund their operations, and they would do it more cheaply. And that has been the story about them being able to borrow more cheaply than the regulator thought. And when Macquarie took over Thames Water, they sort of pushed that to the max. And they did take out a lot of... there's a big argument, I think, about the role of dividends in this whole thing.
Yes.
I think in the case of Macquarie and Thames, though, you can say that they certainly took a lot of money out of Thames. And also, if you talk to people in the water industry, they think that Thames has been a bit mismanaged, in fact, quite mismanaged. A lot of the engineering functions, the things that make you a good water company, knowing how to fix stuff, having control of your contractors, has gone out of Thames. It's been hollowed out, and they've outsourced too much stuff. But it does also have to be said that, so Thames, when it was privatised, had no debt and now has about £16 billion. That £16 billion has been used to do something and not just pay dividends. Thames Water built the London Ring Main, the most amazing civil engineering project that has kept London supplied with fresh water. So an awful lot of money has been spent improving and building up the capital's water system.
Yes, but does the argument remain that had there not been so much money going out in dividends up to 2017, it might not quite be 50-something% rise in bills we'd be seeing over the next 5 years now?
Yes, Thames would not be as indebted. And so it wouldn't have quite this crisis of not being able to borrow more. And I think also you could say that if Macquarie had been a better steward in terms of making sure it was good at its job, people wouldn't really mind if it took the dividends.
You mentioned it's a different consortium who owns it now. Macquarie sold it in 2017. Who are the group who own it now?
The group now is a group of sovereign wealth funds, by which I mean state investment funds from across the world, and also some pension funds. So the biggest single shareholder is a group called OMERS, which is a public pension fund for government employees in Canada. And the second largest is the university's superannuation scheme here in the UK, which does pensions for academic and non-academic staff across universities.
Is there, just as a sidebar point, is there ever a concern about the sovereign wealth fund of another country owning a critical piece of our infrastructure? Is that a debate that goes on?
Well, I think we moved way past that debate in the 90s when...
But we're just thinking about like Huawei with telecoms. Do we worry about the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi or China having a slice of the Thames Water
Well, we never
pie?
used to. Those arguments about strategic interests and strategic sovereignty were there in the 80s, part of the 90s. Then we decided we wanted to be friends with China. We sold our gas transmission networks, for example, to all people from all over the world. It wasn't that long ago, in fact, it still has it, that a Chinese nuclear power company has the right to build a nuclear power station in Bradwell in Essex, just around the corner from London. And airports, lots of sensitive infrastructure have been sold to foreign investors. It comes and it goes, and only recently did the government put into place a new bit of legislation which gives it a much broader ability to interfere and take over.
Thinking about this current consortium who own Thames Water at the moment, Thames Water is always at pains to say that they haven't been paying out dividends since 2017, that they don't do that anymore. That's not quite the case, is it, as you hinted at earlier? There is some money going out to its parent company.
Well, there has been a small amount of money going out to this intermediate holding company called Kemble Water, and this has been the most recent source of friction between Thames Water and its regulator, Ofwat. So Kemble itself doesn't have any assets, but it does have some borrowing. Its only source of cash is Thames Water. So in order to keep Kemble solvent to allow it to meet the payment on its debts, Thames has been paying some dividends up the chain to Kemble. Last year it paid out a dividend of about £38 million to Kemble, and that's being investigated by Ofwat. Now, which is where the solvency crunch comes in. Kemble has had some debt due. There was one about 6 weeks ago and one at the end of this month. And of course, they can't pay it unless they get money out of Thames Water. And Ofwat has already signalled via this investigation that it doesn't want any more money flowing up the tree from Thames Water to Kemble. So Kemble doesn't have any money. The debt comes due. Who takes over?
So is that where this current hoo-ha has come from?
That's where the rubber will hit the road, really. What happens when the lenders of Kemble don't get paid? Now, normally you would just think, okay, well, in a situation like this, the lenders will take over. That's what happens. If you can't pay the mortgage on your house, the bank takes the keys. Thank you very much. But do they want to take it? Who are the lenders is a very good thing, because it's a very tricky market to work out exactly who owns what.
And how is this all playing out actually within, well, Thames Water itself, both in terms of the management? We've had resignations in the last year or so, wasn't it? And also one of the shareholders, didn't they pull someone off the Thames Water board as well?
Thames has found it hard to have a stable management for a while now. They were run by a guy called Steve Robertson. He left in 2019. They had a whole year without a chief executive. Then they appointed Sarah Bentley. She left towards the end of last year, and it took them a while to find a replacement, and they've just recently appointed a guy called Chris Weston.
Well, joining me now to talk about this is Chris Weston. He's the Chief Executive of Thames Water. Chris Weston, thanks for joining me this morning. It's been widely reported that you're seeking bill increases of up to 40%. Is that a number you recognise?
So I don't think we have been at all secretive about that. The plans that we have put forward, which are very much in accordance with what customers are asking us to do, require an investment of around £20 billion in that 2025 to 2030 period. And that would result in a bill rise of around 40%.
Chris Weston, for what it's worth, given a pay package worth up to £2.3 million a year, including over £100,000 in annual pension payments.
Thames Water is not a plum job, pretty much. It's a very difficult turnaround. And there's the financial thing, and then there's the whole organisational and executing on this giant plan of works and making Thames Water work properly.
I see. So what happens now then? You mentioned that there's a possibility that the government could take the licence off Thames Water if it gets too bad. How firm are those plans?
I think they would prefer not to do it, because it will be very messy. It's got this code name Project Timber. But quite how it plays out is not clear.
And if that fails, this Project Timber, if that's put into place, can we call that renationalisation?
It'll be a temporary renationalisation. The government will appoint a firm of accountants to take it over, and it will spend a period under the protection of the government before it is put back into the private sector.
What will that do, though, to the rest of the privatised British utilities market if you all of a sudden having the government step in like that and write off some of the debts?
Well, I think that's a good point. It depends what they do to the existing lenders. If they completely shaft them and force them to take a really big haircut, perhaps even, like 70% of the value of their investment, that would chill the market for UK investment, I think. And if you think about it, the government does need lots of investment, and it does lots of borrowing on its own account. If the UK government demonstrates that it's quite happy to shoot private investors in public infrastructure, then the price of those bonds will go up.
Yeah, because why would anyone want to go near it? And is there any difference with what Labour might do with this? Because, of course, it could be them dealing with this after general election.
Well, absolutely. I don't think any government, Labour or Conservative, wants the risk of Thames Water's borrowings coming completely on the public purse. That'll be another 18 billion of borrowing.
Well, I think the leadership of Thames Water has been a disgrace. I think for years now, we've seen the customers of Thames Water taken advantage of by successive management teams that have been taking out profits and not investing as they should have been.
Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove.
Now, government borrowing is about 2.2 trillion. But if you have a fiscal rule that is quite finely balanced of reducing public sector debt to GDP, that ratio over 5 years, and it's only just moving in the fifth year, then 18 billion might tip your fiscal rules out of the cart completely. And if you extend it to the whole water sector, well, what's that? Probably another 100 billion. So you don't really want to go around nationalising water before breakfast, really.
Thinking about, what a question, from 1989 to today, how has this been allowed to happen, do you think?
Well, the problem has always been who's going to pay for all this. They wanted to find a way to get it off the public balance sheet, and they did that by privatising it and putting on the private sector's balance sheet. Similar to the motivation for the private finance initiative in health, they wanted new hospitals but couldn't afford them, so they went to the private finance initiative, and Labour under Tony Blair embraced that very enthusiastically. So the UK really was a bit of a groundbreaker in terms of trying to use private capital to do public services And the consistent theme is that one thing you can't outsource is failure. Because when it comes to public infrastructure, the public expects the government at the end to guarantee its provision.
Do you think we'll have some kind of big rethink about who owns water and sewage in particular, in the same way that Labour has now moved to saying that actually, over the course of 5 years or so, we will bring all the rail franchises back under national control?
Well, rail is really easy, though, because rail involves a very small amount of money to get the train operating companies back into the public sector. And given the way it's already run, it's not far off being a nationalised industry anyway. So rail is kind of a bit of a red herring. Water is big money, and energy is also big money. Bringing the whole of the water balance sheet back into the government finances would be a massive step for the government finances. I don't think any government really has any particular desire to do that at the moment. But these things tend to go with fashion. The only reason that the government doesn't like individual departments making these small spending promises year to year, not taking the full debt on its balance sheet, is because of Lord Asquith, the Liberal Chancellor in 1906, who said that this is not going to work anymore, and that became part of the public sector spending rules. So it's really just fashion as to what you can do and what you can't do.
I didn't have Herbert Asquith on my bingo card for this episode, but well done. Just finally, does this all feed into a sense that some people have that nothing works in this country anymore? The chair of the National Infrastructure Commission said last week that the government could no longer duck key decisions because we were falling behind on rail, transport, energy, water, flood defences, waste. I mean, this all feeds into a picture, and it's not quite clear as to why it was ever this way.
Yeah, it's a very big question, isn't it? And I think that is a big kind of soul-searching thing that brings together all kinds of themes. Britain as a post-imperial power, post-industrial power, ageing population, the north-south split. I mean, in London, the London public transport system is an absolute marvel of the world. It's probably one of the best in the world, but people think it's not very good. It is very, very good by any kind of international standard, the tube, the buses and the train, the commuter trains. But if you go outside of London, train services are just not that good, really. And so that historical divide, where the money is going to come from, what kind of jobs our kids are going to do, that is a big sort of existential question for the UK. I think it's far too glib to say that things don't work, even if when you are trapped in a traffic jam on hold to your GP and haven't been able to get an appointment for 3 weeks, you might well think that nothing works. But bits of the UK work really, really well.
Good bit of optimism to drag us away from the plug hole. Dominic O'Connell, thank you. We approached Macquarie and Thames Water for comment on these issues that we've been discussing in the podcast. A Macquarie spokesperson told us our part ownership of Thames Water ended 7 years ago, but enabled the largest investment programme in the company's history at more than £11 billion. That record level of investment wasn't enough to make the progress we all wanted to see, but it helped deliver significant improvements, they said. A Thames Water spokesperson told us Thames Water's 3-year turnaround plan and implementation is underway. Discussions with Ofwat and stakeholders are ongoing. The CEO, Chris Weston, has committed to providing services for the benefit of our customers. Dominic O'Connell, Times Radio's business correspondent. You can get more from Dom in the business section of The Times. You can read that, of course, at thetimes.co.uk if and only if you have a subscription. The producers today were Edward Drummond and Ed Halford. The executive producer was Fiona Leach, and sound design and theme composition was by Mauro Seto. The Times launched the Clean Up campaign last year, and it has helped keep up the pressure on authorities to fine polluters as well as bring forward infrastructure investment. Maybe you are affected by this. Maybe you're a Thames Water customer, or you're the customer of another water company that you don't think is doing very well at the moment. You can let us know on our email, thestory@thetimes.co.uk. Goodbye.